And thanks to those online. Please do continue the chat as you encounter difficulties. And thanks to those here in the room for joining us for spiritual exercises for the Guaraní-Christian soul, 2 rare 18th century indigenous language manuscripts. My name is Joshua Youngblood, Associate Dean for Special Collections in the University of Arkansas Libraries. And we are excited to be able to learn today from Professor Austin Cerno. So a couple of brief notes about our Zoom. We are recording this, and we do have moderators, Jennifer Day and Sarah Barclay, both with Special Collections, who will be checking comments. We'll ask you to hold on to your comments. Go ahead and put them in there in the chat if you'd like, but we'll do a Q&A after remarks are finished. Dr. Leonardo Cerno, Fulbright Scholar in Residence here in Fayetteville, is one of the world's leading experts on colonial variant of the Guarani language and modern Guaraní-Spanish bilingualism in South America. Dr. Shawn Austin is Associate Professor of History here at the University of Arkansas and a frequent patron and partner of Special Collections in the libraries. Together, they are currently co-teaching Indigenous Communities and Languages in Spanish and Portuguese, Lowland, South America, 1500 to 1800, which unpacks fascinating Indigenous linguistic histories of the colonial era in Portuguese Brazil and Spanish Rio de la Plata. It is especially gratifying to have this presentation here in Special Collections, as some of the source material that they'll be using in their study and that they'll be sharing today reflects the partnerships that the University Libraries seeks to cultivate with faculty on campus to acquire or to make accessible what they need for teaching and research. For those of you on Zoom, I'm sorry you won't get to enjoy our rare books, but I have a couple of examples of rare books that are on display right now. We have a book that we just brought in support of Dr. Austin's research, which is a Juan Eusebio Nuremberg from 1684, which of course was very influential in the Jesuits who were working in South America. Also on display is our 1605 La Flor del Inca, one of our landmarks for our collecting on Mississippi Valley, colonialism, and contact in North America. Our Henri Joutel, first edition 1713 in French, which we just brought in a couple of years ago to support Linda Jones, a professor in our world languages. And our 1770 history of Nueva España, which is the Cortes letters, which we have brought in to support art history and Latin American studies here. And so for this presentation, the libraries and our Division of Collections and Open Initiatives and Associate Dean Jess Morales, working together with Special Collections and other liaison librarians, Beth Jewell, Hannah King, who works with the History Department, we are elated that some of the crucial resources that Professor Austin and Professor Cerno need and that his students are using are now available and will be showcased a bit today. And in that work, we actually worked with another repository in the United States to acquire digitized manuscripts and then make them publicly accessible as an open access initiative. So I'm very proud that we're seeing the results of that right now. So thanks again for joining us, and I'll hand it over to Professor Austin Cerno. So let me delete the close the participants here. All right. And then let you guys drive with sharing the chart. Audio is good now? Okay.
All right, thanks for coming out, everybody. We're small, but we know each other, and I appreciate you being here. I really, I just want to thank Joshua Youngblood for organizing and helping us get this launched. this was the first step to get these documents is an email to you, and my wish came true. So I really appreciate all the work with the Hispanic Society to get these documents, and Beth Jewell, who facilitated the digital arming of the documents and putting them online. I know that took a lot of work and a lot of coordination, and I really appreciate it. So we're grateful to be looking at these really interesting texts. So the text at the center of our presentation. I think I'll just click. I'm gonna have to just click. No, that's working. Just catching up. These are the two manuscript documents. They are housed at the Hispanic Society's Museum and Library in Manhattan, and you can only
Apologies for that, I'm not sure.
Sorry.
Well, why don't I just do the mute here, and maybe that'll stop that. And so we're going to be referring to manuscript A, and then we're going to refer to manuscript B as these two texts. So we got the texts. I don't know how long it's been now that we've had access to them, but now the problem is reading them. They're monolingual Guarani texts in a high religious discourse that I don't really read very well. And so Dr. Cerno is my teacher and trainer in Guarani, and we began collaborating on some other translation and research projects. And this idea came about to bring him to the University of Arkansas on a Fulbright Scholar and residence grant. And once I kind of got that set and got him committed to coming, I basically roped him into these manuscripts and taking a look at them. They are known to a handful of scholars that do this kind of work, but they really have not been studied systematically. What we are presenting is not a complete systematic study. It is a very initial start. It would take months and months to work through these texts. And I do want to say at the outset that he did virtually all of the heavy lifting in sort of going through the text. We did some transcriptions together, but going through the text and trying to figure out how these texts actually work and what we're seeing. So to the scholars that are online, I do want to just make you aware that the links are up and available, and you can access these texts online for the first time ever. And so that's a wonderful thing to get these out into the world. Previously, you would have to go to the Hispanic Society and pay for your own digital copy or read in situ. And so it's nice to be able to share these documents. So some background. The peoples at the center of our talk are Guarani peoples. This map on the left shows living communities throughout the states of Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. There are thousands of Guarani and Guarani speakers today. We are looking at a variant of a language that is shown in this map as it's spread by about 1500 at the time that Europeans arrived. So the language that we are studying is a variant of that language. And you can see how widespread the Tupi Guarani family of languages were throughout South America. So we are looking at this complex of history and a complex of peoples. And our research centers on the Guarani Jesuit mission towns. And this is a kind of a process of its own. It's part of a larger process of colonization, Spanish and Portuguese colonization in South America. You have Portuguese first come into the region. The first kind of active, fully fledged evangelical efforts from the Portuguese are at the hands of Jesuits. When the Spanish come into the region, the first fully fledged evangelical efforts are at the hands of Franciscan priests. Jesuits arrive a little bit later and continue evangelizing Guarani and other peoples. And then they become the most powerful religious order and create a complex of Guarani towns that are powerful in the region. At their peak, you had about 32, and then down to 30 towns, called them missions or mission towns. And at their demographic peak around 1730, you had 140,000 indigenous people in these towns. So it's a large population center. The economy of the region is based especially in cattle. It's also based in the trade of yerba mate, which is a local infusion, which is circulating throughout the region. The Guarani mission towns engaged in those economies, but they did it through the mediation of Jesuits. So these indigenous people in these towns had not isolation, but they had a strong buffering from the neighboring populations. And so when we look at these complex of towns, this is the best preserved mission town, which is in Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil, the São Miguel mission town. You have elaborate Guaraní-Christian culture that develops there. And the period from the 1680s to the 1730s is a period of cultural flourishing. And these stone churches and kind of monumental churches that are built are from that time period, and that's going to be our focus today. So I want to pass the torch to Dr. Cerno, who's going to begin to help us think about the language itself and how it comes into texts.
Okay. I'm going to read my part. The process that we call first standardization of Guarani was carried out in the so-called general languages, or lenguas generales, mainly after the Third Council of Lima in 1583. The general language were, at that time, indigenous language already widespread at the time Spaniards arrived to South America, and for this reason, spoken by a great number of indigenous people. This includes Quechua in the Central Andes, Tupi in Brazil, and Guarani in the Rio de la Plata. After initial and haphazard attempts at evangelization, Iberians began to see the need to convert indigenous to Christianity through a more skilled use of this general language. This demanded a great deal of linguistic work from giving these languages an alphabet, selecting the indigenous words and concepts to express Christian ideas like sanctity, sacrament, Holy Spirit, etc., and developing unified texts for catechism, worship, and preaching. This challenging work also implied introducing changes to the semantic fields of pre-Hispanic indigenous languages, especially in the fields of religion or kinship, as well as in other in which cultural differences between European and indigenous societies were wide. The outcome of this first stage of standardization in Guarani has taken place in the work of Ruiz de Montoya, his linguistic works printed in Madrid in 1639 and 1640 includes a grammar, a dictionary, a thesaurus with the until today biggest sample of Guarani words and phrases, and a catechism. From this material, the new hired priests were able to learn the language as well to compose new religious textual material. Important to notice is the introduction of an alphabet adapted to Guarani particular phonology, which includes vowels and consonants which are not found in Spanish or even in other European languages. The first standardization process created, therefore, a lexicon for the vast majority of concepts related with Christian religion, like Tupin for God, Maraen for virginity of Maria, Añadeta for health, Yecoacu for fast, and Marangatu for sanctity, among others. These items are composed of a Guarani word with a new Christian semantic overimposed on the indigenous semantics. For example, the traditional meaning for Yecoacu, fast, was related to taboo practices and the rules around eating and physical contact for Guarani men when their wives were pregnant. Tupin, the word for God, referred in pre-Hispanic times to a goddess of storm and water. Standardization helped to stabilize and impose this new Christian meaning because it relied on unified and printed texts, which were going to be repeated in many mission towns where preaching, worship, sermons, and any number of ritual practices need a consistent and correct vocabulary.
So the second period of standardization, I don't know if I have to pump this or it's just really slow. The second period of standardization takes place from the 1680s to the 1730s. Now, this standardization of the language involves updating these genres and creating a kind of more stable vocabulary for these genres. So you have catechisms which were approved during the Third Council of Lima in the 1580s, and taking some of that terminology and coming to terms with it. And there's a lot of debate over this terminology in the 1650s. And it's very political. Internally, within the missions, the goal for the second standardization is to assist the priests in better preaching to the Guarani. And you have growth, demographic growth, you have new priests coming in who don't know the language, and so you need materials. And so a lot of attention is paid to producing those updates. You also have new peoples coming in who are bringing different variants of the language or non-Guarani languages into the missions. And so there is this variety that they're trying to deal with. So you have sermons as the kind of an epitome of a kind of genre in the missions, and this is the goal. Another genre that you see appear in the Guarani are lives or martyrology, description of old saints. And then what you have are devotional texts, and that's going to be our focus for today. Now, one institutional development in this second, that is part of this second standardization, is the flourishing of confraternities, religious sodalities. There are two in the Jesuit Guarani missions, the sodality of St. Michael and the sodality of St. Mary. There's a hierarchy. Saint Michael is the lowest, Saint Mary is the highest. And so these sodalities are extremely important in the mission towns. Every mission town has these two. There's in one document, there's a record of there being 40% of the town is a member of these two sodalities. It's extremely high. That's probably odd, and the average was much lower. But it gives us a sense that these religious institutions have this really important role to play, and this helps us explain why these devotional texts were created. Because a lot of these texts were being directed towards the members of the sodalities, that is, the especially devout Guarani, okay? One of these devotional texts, the first of these to be printed in the mission towns on a mission press is this text. Now, we should back up. There is a mission press. It is the first printing press in Lowland South America, and it's in a Guarani mission. You have to go to Lima to find the first printing press. Okay, so the Jesuits create this press for a variety of reasons, but one of them is to get more texts into the hands, especially of priests, and then also these especially devout. So one of the first printings on the mission printing press or presses, there might have been several, is an adaptation, a monolingual Guarani adaptation of this text. And we have, Joshua has facilitated the purchase of an example or a copy of this text that's just sitting back there. It's Juan Eusebio Niedenberg. This was a Jesuit. He was extremely popular. There were just dozens and dozens of printings of this text, 75 editions. And the edition printed in Antwerp in 1684 by the Hieronymus Verdusen Publishing House is the text that we have back there. And it is the text from which they developed the Guarani adaptation, which on the right, you can see an image of that printing, and on the left you have the 1684 Spanish printing. So we have some ideas about which Jesuit in Paraguay was behind this project. It probably took a lot of effort and a lot of time, but they were able to create a text that they printed on mission printing presses. One feature of this Guarani edition is the expanded number of images that they included, and they're copper plate images, which are extremely expensive and technical, and they're doing this in the mission towns. So this is a crucial kind of initial step in the production of devotional texts. And when you print it, you have a text that has reached a kind of height. So I'm going to pass the torch to look at another text.
The second important work to consider in relation to devotional literature is the book Araporú, printed in Madrid in 1759 and 1760. With the full title of On the Wise Use of Time, the book was the most extensive print edition of Guarani literature of all time, comprising 2 volumes with a total of 829 pages written entirely in Guarani. No other book from the Paraguayan mission came close to printing of 1,500 copies of Araporú. The octavo, or pocketbook edition, suggests that it was designated to facilitate individual handling by indigenous readers, as well as its mobility in private spaces. Hints drawn from these external features match what the text of the 2 prologues in the volumes say, strongly encouraging individual reading. The Araporú presents the name of Father José Izaurralde as its author, in its cover. The fact that Father Izaurralde died almost 30 years before the publication of this book suggests rather that it was inspired by a series of anonymous manuscripts with many formal similarities to Araparu, dated between 1713 and 1715. Furthermore, the structure and content of the manuscript attribute to Izaurralde, as well as those of the Araparu, seems to have as their primary antecedent the spiritual exercises of Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuit order, published in 1540. The Araparu follows the structure of the spiritual exercise of Ignatius of Loyola. It is organized into 4 weeks, which are the 30 days usually required to practice spiritual exercise, for example, in a convent. Or, on the other hand, Izaurralde's handreading partially share this organization of day-by-day meditation, but differs in that it includes other doctrinal genres like the question-answer modality of catechism regarding the Catholic canon. In this way, we see an intertextual coherence among the Guarani devotional texts, which seems to be based on the idea of developing Loyola's spiritual exercises in the Guarani language, a project probably initiated by Izaurralde, continued by others after his death, and finally concluded with the impressive printed edition that is Araparu.
So that brings us to our texts, the manuscripts from the Hispanic Society. They are somewhat of a mystery in terms of where they came from. The bibliographic information that was added later to them, perhaps in the 19th and then the 20th century, are indicating that they come from San Carlos or St. Charles mission town, so Guarani mission town. We know that the bibliographic information here suggests that they were in the hands at one point of a kind of historian, French historian enthusiast named Alfred de Musset in the late 19th century. And it may be that what de Musset is noticing is that at the end of manuscript B, there is a kind of life, a vitae to St. Charles. And he may have assumed that this would indicate that it came from San Carlos. So this is one theory to explain why it's associated with St. Charles, but we really, internally from the text, we really don't know. And the external evidence doesn't provide shed any light there. So let's consider the kind of textual genealogy of these manuscripts. Now, this genealogy is reflective of its content, but also maybe its inspiration. There is likely some source, okay? And this source is unknown to us. And there is also some relation to the catechism published by Ruiz de Montoya. What we can say is that Araparu and these Hispanic Society manuscripts have some word for word copies. And so this is the relationship between Araparu, that kind of this highest printing of this kind of devotional text, and its relationship to some unknown source and our hand copies. There are also other devotional texts that share a similar kind of arrangement in the John Carter Brown Library dated 1713, and other manuscript in Buenos Aires and another in Paris. So one of the things that we just want to emphasize is that there is still a lot of work that needs to be done to determine how much of each text is intertext with all these texts that we have mentioned. So now we can look at what's inside each of the manuscripts. We're going to start with manuscript A.
With the title of Guaraní Kunumbusu Upe Ikwavenim small book offered to the young men for holy reflection, reading. Manuscript A was clearly conceived as a manual to be read once a day throughout a month. The text is composed of a prologue and 25 chapters called Reflections or Jepiramongeta, which were supposed to be read once per day. The abrupt end of the manuscript at the reflection of chapter 25 suggests that there are chapters missing and that if we had a complete text, we will reach the 30, completing 1 month. The title of each chapter simply states, in the first day, in the second day, in the third day, etc. Numbering the days in Spanish after day 3, because Guarani has cardinal numbers only up to 4. Where chapter 19 should be, we have a reflection or prayer possessing an unnumbered title. It teaches an exercise to resist temptation, which consists of 2 prayers addressed to Jesus Christ and a subsequent comment in the same vein as the rest of the reflection in the book. Manuscript B, on the other hand, has a different structure. Its schedule, it is built around 2 weeks instead of 1 month. Each of these weeks constitutes 2 parts of the book. The first called week 1 and the second called book 2. After the prologue, the first part is organized in a day-by-day structure, as we have already seen. For each day of the week, there are 2 chapters, one for the morning and other for the evening of the day. After the general title of each chapter, there is a small piece of dedication by which the practitioner promises not to sin and dedicate that promise to a saint like Saint Joseph, for example. These dedications are meant to be said aloud. For example, quote, "You will dedicate this day to Saint Joseph, saying, 'Today I will not sin.'" End of the quote. After this, a meditation starts up under the name of Jesai Kohava. Each day or chapter might have one extensive meditation, followed by a significantly shorter one. It is noteworthy that these meditations are both by their name as well by its specific content different than the reflections of manuscript A. The intensive and deeper character of this meditation found in manuscript B was perhaps a next step for those male youth to whom manuscript A was directed. Thus, manuscript A might have been a first step in the spiritual training that would elevate to a more expert spiritual exercise found in manuscript B. Each part of the day, in turn, ended in 2 or more prayers addressed to different saints. The great amount of worship in the first part of this book constitutes an extensive pantheon of saints who will accompany the young men during the week. The second book is different by its title, announcing itself a book, quote, with lessons for all situations, end of the quote, and to be read as, quote, longer exercise, end of the quote. This book lacks dedicatories and prayers, focusing in the meditation or Jesuit Pohava, suggesting that it has a more theoretical or ascetic character. From the individual section titles, we might be able to conclude that it focuses on subjects like death, the devil, and condemnation in hell. Instead of Spanish name for death, it uses Guarani words developed by Jesuits from the word Mbaeapo, which means work. For example, Mbaeapo, the first work means Monday. And the word arete fest for Wednesday. The last part of this second part consists of other devotional readings like preparation for the dead, act of faith, and others. The manuscript closes with a history of St. Charles most probably added after the expulsion of Jesuits, when the manuscript was long circulating and had lost the last pages. The prologue of manuscript A presents the text itself as a small book or quatiamiri, addressed to young males and aimed to give the reflections of God materials to keep them prepared before worldly temptations. Interestingly, the prologue also gives advice about how to read and or to hear the text in order to enhance the results of the reading. The following excerpt employs a metaphor of a drinking bird, which is also found in European ascetic spiritual books. The metaphor serves to teach that the reading must be slow, intensive, and repetitive. The following excerpt is almost identical to sections of Araporu, the already mentioned book, printed about 1759. Therefore, indeed, read a little of it each day, not hastily, but slowly, as the bird drinks sip by sip, for you already know the bird does not swallow the water quickly. It takes small drops with its beak and then lifts its head, swallowing them slowly. In the same way, not you too should read this little book, resting upon each line, meditating it deeply, keeping its words in your mind and in your hearts. The difference between manuscript A and manuscript B are also made clear in the prologue of manuscript B. This prologue presents a short description of the book. In the prologue present a short description of the book, of the nature of the text and its intention, but distinguish itself with the explanation that it contains powerful meditations. For that reason, I offer you in this little book some powerful meditation to help you remain in God's grace and not lose it. Remember that the word for meditation, or Yesaere Kojava, marks a difference with respect to the reflection, or Yepri'a Mongeta. We consider both kinds of text distinct variation of the same genre, with meditation being deeper and more intense than the reflections. The word for reflection is composed of the word for heart, Pu'a, and the word for conversation, Mongeta. It is a neologism that literally means to converse with the heart. The word for meditation, formed with the word for eye, Pesa, and the verb to have, literally means to have the eye or to set one's eye on something. Later in the prologue, we read the following. It reminds the readers or speaker how to read or speak the book for his better profit. In this way, and given your behavior, I offer you, my little brother, with this book, many of the most powerful reflection, which will be your daily reading for 2 weeks, so that you might face temptations and ask God for his grace. I hope you practice them with all your heart and aim. Every day, read, reflect on just a small passage from which you will obtain enormous proportions of God's love. Put it in your mind and in your heart for your battle against the devil and to win it.
So let's unpack one of the terms, one of these key terms in this devotional genre, which is simply the verb to read. And so some philology is necessary. The verb, and there are others, we have time we might dive into, but we'll just limit ourselves to this one, is aquatia mongeta. And you have quatia, meaning book or text. Mongeta is an interesting word in the lexicons. It appears as read or to reason, or rather speak or to reason. And in connection with text, it becomes read or reflect. Okay, so literally though, it is I speak the book. This is the phrase that appears in one of the earliest lexicons and continues in the second standardization and continues in its usage in the devotional text. So you have to imagine this oral culture and its vocabulary and the ways that the Jesuits are taking that oral culture and its language and trying to create a literary culture here. And so this is one of the key words that they use, which is to speak, to reason. And other examples of this word give it a texture of in conversation with others. It's one of the first words to be associated with the implanted town councils in the mission towns. You go into the town council as an officer to mongeta amongst yourselves, okay? So when this word is being used in these devotional texts, I think we need to see that ambiguity because it suggests that these texts are not only being read by an especially devout and a very small minority of literate readers, Guarani readers, but it's being read by those literate Guarani to other members of the confraternity or other devout Guarani. So this phrase, "Quatia mongeta," this verb, "Quatia mongeta," can be I speak the book, I ponder, I reflect the book, or ponder on and reflect on the book. Okay. So this text, these two manuscripts are not Quatia, but they are Quatia miniri, these small books or small texts. And this is it's referent throughout the entirety of these. Did you have other concepts? Because we don't have them in here, but I feel.
No, I have already talked about it. The Amongeta is the word for meditation. Heart, Mongeta, it's the same word to speak or to reason. And it literally means to speak with the heart. And one of the Jesuit linguists in the second standardization process we talk about define this as to reflect, to make a reflection. It's kind of normalized neologism in this time of the mission about in the 18th century.
So some conclusions. There is a lot of work still to be done in the intertextual analysis. And what we really couldn't do, don't have time, and are really not prepared to do, at least I'm not, is to look at other European texts, Latin texts, Spanish sources. There surely are other sources. When you talk about the martyrology sections, when you talk about the reflection sections, there are other scholars, including Professor Cerno, have shown that some of these are medieval sermons that are coming into the Guarani devotional literature. A lot of them, actually. And so this is a really interesting development in our understanding of, this kind of early modern Christianity developing in these missions. The other facet, the other kind of early conclusion we can begin to draw is just to contribute to the ongoing scholarship that shows just how elaborate this devotional life could be in spaces where historians and popular sentiment has ascribed this is the fringe, this is where nothing happens, interesting. This is where you go to die on a frontier fort. This is where it's just sort of frontier life. There's nothing interesting culturally there, and all of these features are just upended by this scholarship and this work that reveals just how elaborate it can be. I hope that the printing press illustrates that as one example. And then obviously the interdisciplinary nature. I can't, as an historian, I'm not prepared to do this kind of work. And I think that Professor Cerno would also agree that it's very helpful to have teams working on these things because you have to just address them from so many different angles. So,
and a comment about the linguistic, the multilingualism in the reduction regarding this kind of devotional text. There's a lot of leading quotation in this text, not the large passages, but small phrases come quite often in the meditations or in the reflections. I guess there is one Latin phrase per page or something like that, which is a great amount. That means that there is a lot to do on shedding light of that multilingualism in the mission regarding classic languages, because we have Latin, and there are open questions about it.
thanks.
I think we have time for questions, and I have questions, but are there questions on the chat? Maybe there won't be some, but questions from the audience?
Well, first, you're blowing my mind with the printing press and this colonial enterprise of encouraging spirituality and belonging to the empire through printing in the vernacular. This is all new to me. But my specific question is, all these additions that you approved, is Atia a neologism, since you're talking about an oral culture? So it's a word for text. Does that come from some other word?
Cuatia?
Oh, you. Yes, that's a good question. Yes, the Guaranis as Native American, there were they didn't they have not have reading text, and the word Cuatia meant originally some kind of design. Design might be a design of the earth or the design of the trees. And so kind of graphical, would you say, pattern in nature, and is applied also to corporal paint. No, probably imitating, for example, the design of some animals. You know, for example, the alligator has something that is a Cuatia. And that was the word used by Jesuits or by missionaries to mean text. No, and after this first, insertion of a new concept into the word Cuatia, the word became more meanings or became more polysemic. And Cuatia might refer, for example, to letters, to books, or to reading. That is one of the semantic changes which the Guarani language underwent in this colonial context.
You're pondering the pattern.
The pattern, yeah. Yes.
This might be a difficult question to answer, but I'm just going to pose it anyway. So I'm curious about, so when you were talking at the beginning about these different terms, these neologisms like "tubang" and other words that basically had a different meaning originally, and the Jesuits were kind of trying to, use these words to essentially get at these, these religious concepts that were very Western European. Do we have any idea what the native speakers at the time, how they interpreted that? Because I'm imagining there's no way that the translations of virginity and God and all these very Christian ideas, there's no way that they came through 100% in the same way in Guarani as they originally were. Like, do we have any idea what your average native speaker at the time, how they would interpret this? Like,
yes. It is a difficult question, but it's important. And we don't have, full answer for that question, but there are some clues that there are cases of not acceptance of the neologisms. So you might, that's the reason why we used to talk about Jesuit Guarani and a reductional Guarani. So the Guarani, the Jesuit tried to talk to impose, and the real spoken Guarani by the Indians, by the indigenous. And for example, there are cases related to the word for Christian, a Christian guy. The word the Jesuit tried to impose was Caraí. But one of the so Rita Montoya says they write about not to use that word because indigenous people are calling Caraí not only for Christian, but also for people not being Christian at all. So they classify everything coming from the white word as Caraí, and for Montoya plus it because that was not the meaning of Christian. Christian means specifically to be, regard to God practices and not just to be white. And in this sense, Montoya was a white problem, huge problem, because of course they were white, will not act as Christian at all. And there are some cases like this. That is one case of non-acceptance of that the indigenous people start to use words non-planified by the Jesuits, and other cases. If you compare, for example, the text of the language used in the first standardization time, together with the text on the second standardization time, you see changes, and these changes might have to do with non-acceptance of the speech community of these neologisms. An example of this is, for example, new Guarani words for bureaucracy, for example, words for council, word for cabildo, words for corregidor, for amanuense. In the second time of the standardization, what you have in the lexicons and vocabularies are Spanish loanwords. That means it doesn't works. It didn't work what Jesuits proposed at the beginning. But in religion realm, it is quite difficult to imagine how the indigenous understood the proposal of Jesuits. Most usually, it was a mutual accommodation of. We have the case in Brazil. In Brazil, for example, with Jesuit in Brazil, they played native Tupi songs with Tupi text, but in Christian scene. So one can imagine the indigenous danced from their God, but the Jesuits danced and played for the Christian God. It was a kind of interpenetration of cultures. So that is the more general frame.
I'll just add one example of a failed neologism that Montoya in the first standardization has. It's carnal sin. And the Guarani is Cuñapo Tajara, he who desires a woman. Right, so it's a concept, a sin concept that should be applicable to both genders, but is directed towards the body of the female, right? The desire of the woman. There's no other desire of the man that the woman might say to describe it. So it appears to be a very clunky neologism, just at first glance. And you don't see it in the second standardization. So that's one way we might be able to make the leap to a sociolinguistic interpretation and say, well, maybe people just rejected it because, they didn't like that association with women and sin. But we don't know. Yeah.
So I'd like to know a little bit more about the use of copper plates, which is astounding. And in fact, you have texts that are being produced that are mirror or they're similar to texts being produced in Antwerp, which is a center of publishing technology, French technology at the time when this was a little bit earlier. So what was the labor involved there? How did that transmission of skill happen? Was it indigenous labor doing that work? Just tell us more. That's amazing.
I do not study this. There's other scholars working on the study of the printing press, Fabian Vega and Pedro Leal, and they're doing really interesting and good work. What's come forth so far is we just don't have a lot of details about the process itself. But yes, they are indigenous laborers and artisans, and they are producing almost everything for the press in situ. So ink, type, plates, the technology for the plates, that you're probably cobbling things together from across the Atlantic for some of the tools, who knows. But when it comes to paper, it's all European paper.
Yeah, that's a follow-up question.
Yeah,
Which is similar throughout the New World. It's like most of the papers can be imported.
yeah, and as an insight into the process, the texts that were printed from 1704 is the first, to 27. That's the period in which it was functioning. there are 3 mission towns named San Javier, San Loreto, and Santa Maria. So it's either being moved, right? Or they maybe have 2 presses. But this suggests that you're training different groups in different towns, and you have a specialized group who's doing some of that training alongside the Jesuit fathers. Really, it's lay brothers who are doing a lot of that training and training up not masters, but training up the artisans and the.
And the examples of the places you provided, you could see that they are copies of design, pretty close, but there's lots of variation there too. So this would be an American artist creating this copy.
Pedro Leal is the guy to read on this. He's the one who figured out which edition, etc. And the text, is a very, as far as I've fiddled with it, it's very literal. It's very true to the Spanish. And Professor Cerno has worked a lot more with this text. And I think that's what you all found.
With Nuremberg. I didn't work a lot with Nuremberg. I just can say that it's quite difficult to understand the Guarani because the subjects are kind of abstract, ascetic philosophy. So I have not dedicated too much time to it, but the question you asked about South American interpretation of this classic grabados, how do you say it? Engravings. There are works about this because it's the easiest part to understand. To compare the European version and the Guarani version, but it's quite sure that there were indigenous artists making the things. Imagine that pro town there were 2 Jesuits and 1,000 Indians. So you don't have more than indigenous to make this stuff. And they are research comparing both. And it's very interesting because I guess Thomas Rignon dedicate a couple of pages on this in his thesis, because there are some original vine in the copies. It's not just a copy but an interpretation. For example, in the image of the hill is quite different in the Guarani version. There are some monsters are something like a Guarani bad dream, and not coming really from classical this kind of Baroque art. You had some original notes in the Nuremberg Guarani edition, yes.
A Guarani artist name appears on example engravings that they sent to Rome, and so we have the name of one of these guys, that attaching a name at least. At the same time, what Pedro Leal argues in his really long chapter is that we moderns like to see originality, but in the early modern, copy was really important practice. It was something to be valued. And so there are engravings and in the text itself, it's very true, right? And that is an art in itself, right? And they saw it in that way. At least the Jesuits would be instructing in that way. So this kind of literary culture would really need to be attentive to what Europeanists have really shed light on. Yeah.
Can I ask a question about the copper plate? And it's a small detail, but on the left there is a column, and in the original there is a statue on top of it, while in the copy there is no statue. Seems. Why? Okay, and they are.
I also switch out some of it.
In dollar three.
Ask Pedro Leal.
Okay.
He's done the most recent work on this analysis, and I can't
Run an effort to skirt copyright. It's a slide.
Yeah.
There are interesting differences. For example, there are less, from this in there, and how is the display? Find the same differences. Yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you again, Professors Austin and Cerno. We have recorded this Zoom, and so we'll make it available on the University of Arkansas Library's YouTube channel in the coming weeks with the transcription. So thank you again to everyone online, and thank you for everyone in the libraries who supported this. And thank you to our professors for sharing this incredible presentation. Thanks so much. Have a good day.